Lila Bennett thought her battles were over when she left the war zone, but her greatest fight was just beginning, in the eyes of a dog no one wanted. In a shelter filled with forgotten souls, one dog saw the hero in a woman who had lost her way. Their story isn't just about survival, it's about finding hope in the darkest places, and the kind of love that can heal even the deepest scars. But what happens when the world tells you that you're not enough? That you're too broken to save, or to be saved? Stay with us until the end. You won't believe how this tale of courage, betrayal, and second chances unfolds. Welcome to WhispersStory, the podcast where we dive into tales that tug at your heartstrings, make you laugh, and leave you thinking long after the episode ends. I'm your host, and today, we've got a story that'll take you on an emotional roller coaster. A tale of resilience, unexpected friendship, and the kind of transformation that'll make you believe in second chances. So, grab your coffee, settle into your favorite spot, and let's get started with a heartwarming tale of a female veteran and a shelter dog. You won't believe the outcome. Lila Bennett woke to the sound of her own heartbeat, a steady thump-thump that felt louder than the world outside her tiny apartment window. At 38, she was a woman who'd seen too much sand, too much blood, too much loss. Her years as an army medic in Afghanistan had left scars that didn't show on her skin but carved deep into her soul. She'd come home to Columbus, Ohio 3 years ago, hoping to find peace, but peace was a stranger she couldn't seem to meet. Her apartment was a shoebox of beige walls and thrift store furniture, the kind of place that screamed temporary, even though she'd been there long enough to call it home. The air smelled faintly of burnt toast. She'd forgotten to eat again, and the morning light filtered through a cracked window, casting jagged shadows on the floor. Lila sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling as she laced up her worn combat boots. She didn't need to look in the mirror to know her hazel eyes were bloodshot, her dark hair a tangled mess pulled into a ponytail. She felt like a ghost of the woman she'd once been, the one who'd laughed easily and dreamed of a family, a dog, a life that didn't feel like a battlefield. Today was supposed to be different. She'd promised herself she'd try, really try, to step back into the world. Her therapist had suggested volunteering, something to fill the empty hours that stretched endlessly before her. Lila had scrolled through her phone late last night, the blue light harsh against her tired eyes, and found a local animal shelter looking for help. She'd always loved dogs. Growing up, her family's golden retriever, Max, had been her best friend. Maybe, she thought, a dog could help her feel something. Anything. The shelter was a 20-minute drive, and Lila's old pickup truck groaned as she pulled into the parking lot. The building was a squat, gray structure with a faded sign that read Columbus Second Chances Shelter. The air smelled of wet fur and pine cleaner, and as she stepped inside, the cacophony of barks and whines hit her like a wave. Her chest tightened, a familiar panic creeping in, but she forced herself to keep walking. She wasn't in a war zone. She was safe. She repeated the words like a mantra, but they felt hollow. The shelter manager, a woman with a kind smile and a clipboard, led Lila to the kennels. Rows of dogs stared back at her, their eyes pleading, their tails wagging or still with resignation. Lila's gaze landed on a dog in the last kennel, a scruffy mutt with matted black and tan fur, one ear flopped over, the other torn. His eyes were a deep amber, and they locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The tag on his kennel read Duke, 5 years old, unadoptable. Unadoptable. The word hit Lila like a punch. She knew what it felt like to be labeled, to be seen as broken beyond repair. She knelt in front of the kennel, her knees creaking, and Duke pressed his nose against the bars. His tail gave a tentative wag, and for the first time in months, Lila felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that single, fragile connection, would change everything. Have you ever felt like you were labeled as unadoptable in some part of your life? Maybe at work, in a relationship, or even by yourself. How did you push past that label? Share your thoughts with us. We'd love to hear your story. Lila spent the next week at the shelter, showing up every morning with a quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. She cleaned kennels, filled water bowls, and walked the dogs that would let her near them. But her focus was always on Duke. He was a mystery, a dog with a past as shadowed as her own. The shelter staff warned her to keep her distance. Duke had been returned 3 times, each adopter citing aggression, fear, or just not fitting in. But Lila saw something else in him. She saw the way he flinched at loud noises, the way his body tensed when someone moved too fast. She recognized that look. It was the same one she saw in the mirror every morning. She started small, sitting outside his kennel for hours, her back against the cold concrete wall, reading aloud from a battered paperback she'd found in her truck. Her voice was soft, steady, the words of an old romance novel filling the space between them. Duke would watch her, his head tilted, his amber eyes tracking her every move. By the 3rd day, he let her slip a treat through the bars. By the 5th, he pressed his side against the kennel door when she sat close, as if he craved her presence as much as she craved his. Lila began to dream again, not the nightmares that had plagued her for years, but dreams of a future. She pictured herself and Duke in a little house with a yard, him chasing a ball while she sipped coffee on the porch. It was a simple dream, but it felt like a lifeline. She decided to apply to foster him, the first step toward adoption. She filled out the paperwork with shaky hands, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. What if they said no? What if she wasn't good enough for him? The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Lila was in her apartment, staring at a cold cup of tea, when her phone buzzed. The shelter manager's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm sorry, Lila," she said. "We can't approve your application. Duke needs a stable home, and with your history, we're concerned you might not be able to handle him." Lila's stomach dropped. Her history. They meant her PTSD, the disability benefits she lived on, the fact that she was a single woman with no support system. She wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, but the words caught in her throat. She hung up the phone and sank to the floor, her back against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The rejection felt like a betrayal, a reminder of every time she'd been told she wasn't enough. Not strong enough to save her squad, not whole enough to be a normal veteran, not stable enough to give a dog a home. Outside, the rain pounded against the window, a relentless drumbeat that matched the storm in her mind. But beneath the hurt, a spark of defiance flickered. She wasn't going to let them take Duke away from her. She'd fought for her country, fought for her life. She could fight for him. Have you ever been told you weren't enough for something you really wanted? A job, a relationship, a dream? How did you find the strength to keep going? Let us know, we're here for you. Lila spent the next few days in a haze of determination, her mind racing with ideas. She wasn't going to give up on Duke. Not now, not ever. She sat at her rickety kitchen table, a notebook in front of her, scribbling down every thought that came to her. The shelter had rejected her because of her instability, but what if she could prove them wrong? What if she could show them she was capable, that she and Duke were meant to be together? She started by researching the shelter's policies, her fingers flying over her phone screen as she read about foster requirements, adoption appeals, and animal welfare laws. She learned that the shelter had a board of directors who reviewed cases like hers, and that she could request a hearing to plead her case. It was a long shot, but it was something. She also found a local veterans support group online, a community of people who might understand what she was going through. Maybe they could help her, vouch for her, show the shelter she wasn't alone. Lila's days took on a new rhythm. She'd wake early, her body still heavy with exhaustion, and head to the shelter to spend time with Duke. She'd sit outside his kennel, her voice steady as she read to him, her hand pressed against the bars so he could feel her presence. Then she'd go home and work on her plan, writing letters, making calls, gathering evidence of her stability. She contacted her therapist, who agreed to write a letter of support, and reached out to the veterans group, who offered to help her prepare for the hearing. For the first time in years, Lila felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for Duke. She was fighting for herself, for the woman she wanted to be. She started taking better care of herself, too. She ate real meals instead of skipping them, went for walks in the park to clear her head, even smiled at her reflection in the mirror one morning. It was a small smile, but it was there. But as the hearing date approached, a new fear crept in. What if the shelter was right? What if she couldn't handle Duke? What if her PTSD made her a danger to him, or him to her? The doubts gnawed at her, but she pushed them down. She had to believe in herself, because if she didn't, who would? When was the last time you had to fight for something you believed in, even when the odds were against you? What kept you going? Share your story with us. We'd love to hear it. The day of the hearing arrived, a crisp October morning that smelled of fallen leaves and possibility. Lila stood outside the shelter, her hands clenched into fists, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She wore her old army jacket, the one she'd worn on her last day in Afghanistan, as a reminder of the strength she'd once had. She hoped it was still there, buried beneath the fear and the doubt. The hearing room was small, with peeling paint on the walls and a long table where the board of directors sat. There were 5 of them, 3 women and 2 men, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Lila sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady as she told them about Duke, how he changed her, how she changed for him. She talked about her PTSD, her struggles, but also her progress, her determination, her love for this dog who'd been labeled unadoptable, just like her. The board listened, their expressions unreadable, and for a moment, Lila thought she might have a chance. But then one of the directors, a man with a sharp jaw and cold eyes, leaned forward. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice like ice, "we've received new information about Duke that changes things." Lila's breath caught. New information? What could they possibly mean? The man slid a folder across the table, and Lila opened it with trembling hands. Inside were photos, grainy, but clear enough to make her stomach churn. They showed Duke in a fighting ring, his fur matted with blood, his teeth bared as he lunged at another dog. There were reports, too, from a previous owner who claimed Duke had been trained to fight, that he'd attacked a child, that he was a danger to everyone around him. The room spun. Lila's vision blurred, and she gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. This couldn't be true. Not her Duke, not the dog who'd pressed his nose against her hand, who'd wagged his tail when she read to him. But the evidence was there, staring her in the face, and the board's decision was swift. Duke was to be euthanized. He was too dangerous, they said, too broken. And Lila, they added, was not equipped to handle him. She left the hearing in a daze, her body numb, her mind screaming. She couldn't lose him. She wouldn't. But how could she save him now? Have you ever faced a moment where everything you believed in was turned upside down? How did you find the courage to keep fighting? Let us know, we're here to support you. Lila didn't sleep that night. She sat on her couch, the folder from the hearing open in front of her, the photos of Duke burning into her memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the story didn't add up. Duke wasn't a monster. She knew him, knew the softness in his eyes, the way he leaned into her touch. She started digging, her mind racing as she pieced together the clues. The reports mentioned a previous owner, a man named Carl Hensley, who'd surrendered Duke to the shelter after the alleged attack. Lila found his name in an old shelter record she'd copied during her research, and something clicked. She'd heard that name before, in whispers at the shelter. Rumors of a man who ran an underground dogfighting ring, who used shelters to dump dogs he couldn't use anymore. What if Carl had lied about Duke? What if the photos were staged, the attack fabricated, to get rid of a dog who wouldn't fight anymore? Lila's blood boiled. This wasn't just about Duke. This was about justice, about a system that threw away the broken instead of helping them heal. She thought of her own life, the way she'd been dismissed by the VA, the way her struggles had been used against her. She thought of the privilege of those who'd never had to fight for their place in the world, who'd never been labeled as less than. She wasn't going to let Duke become another casualty of that system. She made a decision, one that felt reckless, dangerous, but right. She drove to the shelter in the dead of night, her truck's headlights cutting through the darkness. The building was locked, but Lila had spent enough time there to know the weak spots. A back door that didn't latch properly, a window that could be pried open. She broke in, her heart pounding, her hands steady as she moved through the kennels. The dogs barked, a chaotic symphony, but she didn't stop until she reached Duke. He was there, his amber eyes wide with fear, his body trembling. She opened his kennel, slipped a leash around his neck, and led him out into the night. They were fugitives now, her and Duke, but she didn't care. She'd save him, no matter what it took. Have you ever had to break the rules to do what you thought was right? What was the outcome, and how did it change you? Share your story, we'd love to hear it. Lila and Duke disappeared into the night, her truck rattling down back roads until they reached a small cabin in the woods, a place her father had left her years ago. It was run down, the roof leaking, the walls creaking in the wind, but it was theirs. For the first time in years, Lila felt free, not just from the shelter, but from the weight of her past. She spent the next few weeks rebuilding, both the cabin and herself. She worked with Duke every day, her voice soft as she taught him to trust again. She used techniques she'd learned from online training videos, rewarding him with treats, praising him when he let her touch his torn ear. Slowly, he transformed. The fear in his eyes faded, replaced by a quiet joy. He'd run through the woods with her, his tail wagging, his bark echoing through the trees. And Lila transformed, too. She started to laugh again, to sleep without nightmares, to believe she could be whole. But the past wasn't done with them. One morning, Lila found a news article on her phone. Carl Hensley had been arrested, his dogfighting ring exposed by an anonymous tip. Lila smiled, knowing she'd been the one to send that tip, using the evidence she'd gathered to bring him down. Justice had been served, not just for Duke, but for all the dogs who'd suffered at Carl's hands. Lila and Duke were safe now, their new life a testament to the power of second chances. She looked at him, curled up by the fireplace, his amber eyes reflecting the flames, and felt a peace she'd never known. They'd saved each other, two broken souls who'd found a way to heal. And that, dear listeners, is the story of Lila and Duke, a tale of resilience, justice, and the kind of love that can change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the Whispers Story channel for more tales that'll make you laugh, cry, and believe in the power of second chances. What's one second chance you've given, or received, that changed your life? Share your story with us, and let's keep the conversation going. And so, in the quiet of the woods, two broken hearts found healing, and a home. Lila and Duke's journey reminds us that sometimes, the greatest battles aren't fought on distant shores, but in the quiet moments when we choose to believe in ourselves, and in each other. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey of redemption and love. If Lila and Duke's story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to Whispers Story, where every tale is a whisper of the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary. Don't miss another story. Hit that subscribe button, and let's keep discovering the magic together.